Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 21st of October 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson, and we will be joined by David Scott with Northern Exposure by live Skype link. Well, the weather apparently in Scotland is, let me get this right, grey, bright and dry, with a suggestion it was better than our weather. But actually, it's a beautiful autumn day here in Plymouth with blue skies and a little bit chilly, but lots of very colourful leaves on the trees. And our overseas report from Holland is that it's sunny and chilly there as well. Will the canals freeze this winter, do you think, Mike?
Quite possibly.
Possibly.
But we're going to start off with the European Council and the ministers' meeting yesterday. Well, they're actually meeting today as well, but this is the EU Heads of State meeting. And today they're talking about ongoing negotiations for trade agreements, which, of course, Theresa May front and centre of, because we're becoming global Britain, Brian. And they're also talking about the modernisation of trade defence instruments. So we can talk a bit about more about that on Monday. But yesterday they were meeting, and the media was presenting this as being, well, Theresa's all very separate. They're kind of shunning her, turning their backs on her. Only 15 minutes to speak at the end of the dinner in the evening. Everybody putting their coats on while she was speaking. This is how it's being presented. Not quite what we see in the photographs. So I mean, she's not exactly marginalised here.
It's Theresa with the red shoes, of course.
Yes. Well, it gets better because she's getting kissed by President Hollande. Ms. Mogherini seems to be quite happy to see her. Even Jean-Claude Juncker seems to be quite happy to see her as well. Yeah. And Lithuanians happy to see her too. So it's all smiles. Donald Tusk, well, he's busy having a joke. So not quite sure what all this sort of marginalisation business. It's an impression the press wants to give to imply that Britain is somehow persona non grata in Europe since Brexit.
And there's tough negotiations going on, and we can trust her because she's going to stand up for Britain while she's kissing and hugging these people.
Well, it's interesting to notice that on the BBC this morning they were saying that the majority of European ministers don't actually believe that Britain will leave the European Union. And strangely enough, Morgan Stanley has put out a release to their customers yesterday that they don't really believe that Britain's going to leave the European Union either. So seems to be many
They're
people...
in line with what we've been reporting for quite a long time, which of course is the Conservative government utterly lying to the British nation over the idea of Brexit.
Absolutely. But Theresa joined the gang yesterday during her speech, and Russia must be punished, she said, for the sickening atrocities in Aleppo. Here's what she said. Russia is undermining the political process and killing people.
Yeah, well, we've never done any of that in Iraq or Libya or Syria or even the Yemen, Mike, or Afghanistan.
Or Egypt or a host of other places. And she went on to say it's vital that we work together to continue to put pressure on Russia to stop these appalling atrocities, these sickening atrocities in Syria. And, well, Priti Patel wasn't there, but of course she had to get her oar in as well. She said a short pause in the onslaught against Aleppo is woefully inadequate. We need to see an end to the bombing and full access for aid agencies into the city, because unless the aid agencies get full access, we can't bolster ISIS there. Well, that's about it. We have decided that, or at least Theresa has joined the calls with Boris, of course, but at the EU ministers' meeting, she has joined the calls to punish Russia.
Punish Russia. Well, before we have a look at what the Russians have been up to, perhaps we should invite David. What's your thoughts on what we're seeing with the illustrious Theresa May and her efforts to take Britain out of Europe, but not?
It's very difficult to know. It's all been done behind closed doors. We have some of the rhetoric is right, some of the information's coming out is wrong. It's very encouraging to know that not only MI5 and Russia Today, but also Morgan Stanley watch the UK column. So that's progress.
Yeah.
Well, we're encouraged by that. So let's follow this through. Of course, the anti-Russian rhetoric is just being ramped up and ramped up by the British press and media. And so we better bring in the Daily Mail. I have to say some photographs here that take me back a few years, because some things never change at sea. But what have they been saying? Well, the main thing that the press is doing at the moment is saying, well, Russia's got this aircraft carrier to sea, but it's very old. It's belching smoke. It breaks down a lot. Yes, we know it's at sea. We know it's flying aircraft, but let's remember it's very old and belching smoke. So we just thought we'd put up a picture of one of Britain's aircraft carriers. This is HMS Ark Royal, a perfectly serviceable ship. It had its aircrew, it had the Harriers, it was an operational warship, and David Cameron simply said, we're going to sell it off to Turkey to be scrapped. So we've just got this rhetoric against the Russians. Well, naughty Russians have got an aircraft carrier at sea. We've been scrapping ours. And of course, people are saying, well, of course, we got 2 new British aircraft carriers. We have, but they're not in service yet. They don't have any aircraft. And we know that there are major problems with trained crew, to the extent that we've got to send people to American warships and even French warships in order to understand how to operate an aircraft carrier. So this was conservative defence policy, which was to destroy Britain's maritime capability. And if you're wondering why they would want to do that, because there had been a backdoor agreement that Britain's armed forces had to be severely cut in strength in order to make it easier, and to give the reason, of course, for the fact that we had to act as part of a European Union force. So we'll emphasise the fact that David Cameron didn't listen at all to anything that was said, because he had this underlying EU political agenda. This is another photograph from this Daily Mail article. And of course, it's showing the Russian carrier and one of the escorting warships. I think it's a Udaloy. What's the significance of this picture? Well, it's been taken by the Norwegian Air Force, and it will have been taken by one of their maritime patrol aircraft. None of the photos in the paper have come from the Royal Navy, but they wouldn't have come from a British maritime patrol aircraft, because, of course, David Cameron had them all scrapped. And he also scrapped the training facility. So there was no question of these aircraft ever being reprieved. So David Cameron, Theresa May, Mr. Fallon, Conservative Party deliberately destroyed a key part of the Royal Navy. And now here we are in 2016, and they're squealing that the Russians have got ships at sea, but those nasty Russians are actually steaming. And let's have a look at this. Another photograph from the Mail. It gets even better, because the headline from the Mail is that the Russians also sent a submarine pictured to protect the carrier group. Well, if you look at the submarine, it's a Russian Delta III or Delta IV ballistic nuclear submarine, which would certainly not be used for escort duties. If you want to know how we identify this pretty clearly, this is a submarine in trouble because it's got one of the missile doors open. Maybe it was doing a live firing exercise. I don't know, but this is extremely unusual. So this is not the submarine. And of course, we know it anyway, because here's part of the insert from the Daily Mail, where they say very clearly that it was a Sierra 1 nuclear submarine. So we are seeing picture after picture, article after article, which is pure rhetoric, and it gets better. This one, a Royal Navy seaman on board HMS Richmond keeps watch on the Russian carrier as it conducts training flights. So that's what they say. This is basically a Royal Navy sailor. But of course, if we have a look at the shoulder tab there, we're looking at a junior officer who would be part of the bridge watchkeeping team. These articles might just cobble together in order to get the propaganda across. And then let's have a look at some of the individual statements. Russian military experts have branded the Royal Navy as weak and claimed the UK is scared of Putin's ships. Expected to pass within just 1 mile of England. Okay, well, I can understand what the Russians are saying there because we've just demonstrated that at the moment the Royal Navy has been considerably weakened by David Cameron. And then don't worry, because HMS Duncan, the world's most advanced air defence destroyer, there is no evidence to support that statement against all of the world's navy, but this is the rhetoric. We can relax because these warships are the most advanced in the world, are they? So one Moscow defence expert claimed that Vladimir Putin is ready to seize control of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. So the Russians are now marching on the world. They're going to take control of the Mediterranean, the whole Atlantic. And apparently the public should believe this nonsense. But don't worry, because the Belgians are now involved and they've sent a frigate. I think it is their frigate, but we can relax, Mike, because the European Navy is doing its job. And then those nasty Russians have decided that they're going to bring up 2 corvettes from the Mediterranean as a cunning tactical plan to divide the Royal Navy's efforts. I think this is out of the boys' own tactical manual. And then they start crowing that the Russians need to qualify their pilots with deck landings. And what the implication is that these are just amateurs. But let's remember, they've got their ship at sea and it's working. There's a Dutch submarine operating south of the English Channel. Well, it would have to be a Dutch submarine because, of course, consecutive Conservative and Labour governments got rid of our conventional submarines, and you can't operate nuclear submarines in shallow waters. A MOD spokesman said it's pretty unambiguous that they have set a course to pass through the Dover Straits. So that's British intelligence at its best. They think they're headed for the Dover Strait, but the fleet could possibly route around Ireland's west coast. So they were a bit unsure there, Mike.
They haven't got a clue.
Well, just to end on a happy note, the Russians are here. And this is the latest headline that actually they did come into the channel. And we can relax because an ITN helicopter was able to spot that they actually had crew on deck, Mike.
Right.
Very dangerous to have crew on deck. But luckily an ITN helicopter, not the Royal Navy, not a RAF maritime patrol aircraft, but an ITN helicopter has been able to track these Russians. David, if I had any more sarcasm, I would have produced it for this. What we're seeing, I have never seen anything so outrageous as the rhetoric and propaganda being poured out. Of course, all to back up the idea of a European naval force and to back up the idea that Russia's causing all the problems in Syria.
It's completely ridiculous. On one level, all of the comments you're making about the long-term strategic planning for the Royal Navy or lack thereof are absolutely right. Remember, we've been through this twice because we got rid of the big carriers before and then had to introduce the smaller ones, having had a gap and lost a lot of the skills and knowledge and experience in the time that elapsed. And then we repeated the problem. I remember it being noted that Admiral Cunningham, the admiral who actually cleared the Mediterranean of opposing forces during the Second World War, would never, if he'd still been in charge, allowed the big carriers to go. We've removed our own assets. We've divested ourselves of assets like Sea Harrier and Nimrod far too early. It's been absolutely ridiculous. And this from the country that invented the aircraft carrier and the steam catapult and the ski ramp launch and the angled flight deck and everything else. It's very, very disappointing, and it shows how badly led we are. But in terms of propaganda, it's got to the point where it is just funny. I've got here that from the headline on the Times, RBS caves in over ban on Kremlin TV station. This is the Russia Today story, and just to illustrate how bad the propaganda is, the Royal Bank of Scotland last night caved into the Kremlin after threatening to close down banking facilities for a TV station spouting President Putin's propaganda. The state-owned bank withdrew its planned punitive, so they're admitting its punitive action, after Moscow claimed it would freeze BBC finances in Russia. and report Britain to the international watchdog for breaching commitments to freedom of speech. And they would be quite right. Right? We all know Russia today as a channel that has far more varied voices, far more free discussion than the BBC allows, and we're being treated to wall propaganda. But the new news is it's not working.
It's very encouraging, David. Thank you for that very sharp analysis on both the RN's carriers and the propaganda machine. But this is good news. If people want good news, the good news is that it's obvious more and more ordinary people are simply seeing straight through this conservative-led propaganda and rhetoric, which is only designed to do one thing, which is to create war and strife.
But, we don't need to worry, Brian, because we've got the new aircraft carriers on their way. We've got the F-35s. Admittedly, they don't fly yet, and they can't shoot their guns while they're in the air. But although they've tested the guns,
few engine fires, and a little bit of structural problem.
But these are only minor issues because, but we don't need to worry because we've got the next generation of nuclear submarines on the way, ballistic nuclear submarines. Here they are. This is the Dreadnought. It has been named today. Michael Fallon has announced today that to mark Trafalgar Day, Her Majesty the Queen has graciously approved that Dreadnought, one of the most famous names in the Royal Navy, will become the lead boat and class name for the Royal Navy's new successor submarines. So there is the computer-generated image, which is Crown copyright, and they say that it may be used for news reporting, but not for any other purpose.
Can we just make plain that this is a computer-generated image?
It is a computer-generated image.
Please don't think that this is real. This is a computer-generated image because this is the strength of the Royal Navy at the moment, that we can generate images.
Right. So this historic resonance, as they call it, calling this Dreadnought, will continue through the names of boats 2, 3, and 4. They haven't named those ones yet. And of course, they haven't actually said, but I believe these are the boats that are going to be built with French steel.
With French steel, because we're coming out of Europe, Mike.
Yes. So let's look at yes, indeed. So let's look at what Michael Fallon said. Every day, our ballistic missile submarines are used to deter the most extreme threats to Britain's security. We cannot know what dangers we might face in the 2030s, 2040s, and 2050s. So we're building the new Dreadnought class. So they have no concept of what threats they might face, have no concept of what military facilities they may need, but they're going to build a Dreadnought class on the basis of what they don't know.
It's amazing, Mike. If we look at some of the documentation, of course, they say, well, the future is all cyber threat. It's all going to be terrorist groups. So presumably they're going to use nuclear weapons on terrorist groups, if Mr. Fallon is correct. But this is an expert, I believe he's an expert in gyms.
Well, we'll come on to cyber shortly. But in the meantime, let's have a look at this one, because also announced yesterday in Paris, Harriet Baldwin, who's the Minister for Defence Procurement, and her French counterpart launched what they're describing as the next phase of a £117 million joint maritime mine countermeasures programme. And so this is it. Working with our French allies, they say, the MMCM programme will develop a cutting-edge maritime mine warfare capability, a capability which will keep the UK and France at the forefront of autonomous systems technology. The development and deployment of unmanned mine clearance vehicle will help keep our personnel safe in challenging marine environments. So this is what she had to say. This innovative project further strengthens the UK-French defence relationship, but we are coming out of Europe, and there's no such thing as European defence integration.
Unfortunately, there is, Mike.
Yes.
Unfortunately, there is. What a wonderful news we're having today on the Friday, the 21st of October. Let's take people back to February 2009. This was the cartoon picture which we had at the top of an article, which was about the European Union taking control of the UK military. So in the picture was Britain's new aircraft carrier. Of course, at that stage, it was a computer-generated image. It has got the ski ramp on the front, but of course, that's that's useless equipment because the Russians have got it, and the Daily Mail's told us that ski ramps are a waste of time. We said that it was going to be joint manned, so it has two main superstructures. In the front are the British, and the French are following along in the second one. And the little caption there, for those of you who can't read it, is the officer of the watch is being asked by the captain, where are the French? And there's a little voice coming from the second superstructure saying, Monsieur, we're right behind you. So there we are. We predicted everything. We predicted that the carriers would be a joint effort with the French and would be ultimately manned with the French, and that this was part of the drive to integrate Britain's Royal Navy into the European Union military structure. And that, of course, is exactly what is happening. And despite the lies over Brexit, that is what Michael Fallon is continuing to drive for.
Now, you mentioned cyber a moment ago, and yesterday Michael Fallon was speaking at RUSI, which is the United
Services Institute.
Yes, Royal United Services Institute, right. And he's saying that the UK is going to invest £265 million to what he describes as boost the defence of military cyber systems. He said that the investment, which supports the new Cyber Vulnerability Investigations Programme, will help the Ministry of Defence better understand cyber risks. And he said, cyber attack is one of our greatest challenges to our security. It's crucial we use our increasing defence budget to stay ahead, and investing in this programme will help us protect against those threats. Now, the BBC had a representative of GCHQ on the Today programme this morning, and he was describing how they intend to develop cyber capability which will help them bring down aircraft and attack various power stations and so on. So that's what this is about, apparently.
Yeah, but they're going to be Chinese-built power stations anyway, and China is our friend. Well, apart from the China Seas, where apparently China's the enemy and the Americans have got their big battle fleets, but those same Chinese who are our enemy are going to be building our nuclear infrastructure.
Yeah.
And then the suggestion is, sorry to labour a point here, but once the Chinese, who are apparently hostile state, build our nuclear infrastructure, we are going to spend public money to stop them hacking into their own infrastructure.
Yes.
Okay, this is pretty clear. Let's have a look at what Boris Johnson said at the Conservative Party conference. This is a report which I took out of the Telegraph. It says Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, set out a vision of Britain as a soft power superpower, projecting values through influence, ideas, and the power of persuasion. If ever there were a time and a place for exercising our national soft power, that time is now, and the place is Mosul.
There we go.
So if we think about how the soft power has been used, we've seen hard military power used in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Yemen. And of course, the ammunition and the supplies have gone to many other regions in the world. But according to Boris Johnson, we're just nice guys using a bit of soft power and persuasion. And waterboarding, apparently.
Yeah, yes, but I mean, to be fair, in most of those cases, it was other countries that did our dying for us.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, David, would you like a response there from a northern perspective, really, on the state of West?
I'd like to comment on the concept that the British state is going to be responsible for an IT project that's going to make other countries afraid. Right? The only people who should be afraid of IT projects are the British taxpayer. They should be very afraid. Did you catch Joe Biden, the uber creepy American vice president, threatening in mafioso style the Russians with terrible cyber reprisals for their alleged hack of the Democratic National Congress computers that showed that there was a fix-in in favour of Hillary. It was incredible. It was cringeworthy. And would someone please explain to that man what covert operations actually means?
Yes.
Well, I'm just going to stay silent, because if we get talking about Hillary Clinton, where you can see her being asked question after question, where she has said one thing and then it's proved that in fact she's lied. It goes on, and she didn't bother to use protected IT equipment. She simply set up her own servers to run classified documents, but it doesn't matter because there's a completely different rule for the forthcoming president of the United States.
But let us always remember, Brian, that Hillary was named after Sir Edmund Hillary, who conquered Everest 6 years after she was born.
Yes.
Okay. What are we going to do? Well, one of the things is, it's education, really. People need to understand what is really happening. We're being given a puppet show of politics, and these are dangerous individuals, hence the wars and the devastation overseas. So we say that the rule of law is broken down in UK. The 19th of November, the British Constitution Group is going to be talking about these serious issues. What has happened to the rule of law in UK? What has happened to our constitution? What do we need to do to reassert the rule of law? If you haven't got a ticket, I'm delighted to say that ticket sales are going well. So if you haven't got a ticket yet, you need to get one. And we have a range of speakers. Next week, we'll be introducing more speakers. But here we've got Vanessa Beeley, who will be giving us a first-hand account of her experiences in Syria, reporting real events on the ground. And we've also got our own Guy Taylor, who has shown immense bravery by going into some of the most corrupt courts in the land in order to challenge that system as to what they're doing. And of course, we have to take back control of the courts. We have to get juries to be making proper decisions, including annulling laws that are bad laws. We need to get this happening if we're to get proper governance back in this country. And also from our very own Theo, just a reminder that tomorrow in Totnes, the Royal Seven Stars Hotel, there's the first meeting of the Rule of Law Forum in Totnes. So this is a mini meeting, if you like, some really excellent speakers, but people are going to be looking at these same issues, the breakdown of the rule of law in UK and what we need to do to get our constitution working properly.
Right, to lead into David's stuff mainly, we're just going to highlight this little article from Demos here. Commissioning in children's services, what works? So Demos, the think tank, what are they saying? They're saying despite significant policy attention and political action, looked after children and children with special educational needs and disabilities remain some of the most vulnerable children in the country, with their later life outcomes remaining stubbornly poor. And they say that two sets of pressures are putting children's services departments under considerable strain. First, the demand from children's social care is rising. Between 2008 and 2015, local authorities saw a 22% rise in referrals for social care for children and a 16% increase in the number of children in care. That statistic alone is spectacular, Brian. They say that it's not only the volume of demand, but the kind of demand that is exerting pressure. The need for looked after children the needs of looked after children becoming more complex, and the introduction of education, health, and care plans require local authorities to think more creatively about how they will meet the needs of children, especially with special educational needs. Now, of course, part of the problem there is that this demand for, particularly for special educational needs, is being driven by the fact that extra benefits are given, and there's pressure on parents to actually register the children as requiring special educational needs help. And then they say, second, local authorities are facing continued and severe cuts to their budgets. And so what do they go on to talk about? They basically go on to talk about the privatisation of care in children's services. And this is particularly dangerous, of course, because once that type of thing ends up in private hands, we get even less oversight and less sight of what is going on.
Well, and of course, at the moment, some of the most vulnerable children with multiple special needs are being looked after by private companies who can be earning 230, 40, 50, 60,000 pounds a year per child.
Yeah.
So this is big money business.
David, before we come into your topics, what do you think of that?
Well, all these things where you're dealing with a government that has coercive powers of taxation, so they're taking money essentially at the pointy end of a bayonet, and then that's being distributed, not controlled in any way by the people for their collective benefit, but being siphoned off to well-connected private interests. You have really the worst of both worlds. You have all the drive of the private sector, but rather than being a drive towards satisfying customers, the customers become, in fact, a commodity, and their only drive is to satisfy politicians. It's an invitation to corruption on a vast scale.
Indeed. Well, let's start here with the Inverness Courier. Now, this is going back a few years, 2011. Janitor charged with showing indecent images to pupils. Now, this is an introduction to the Highland investigation. And you had a number of articles here on this particular school. The school janitor then placed on the sex offences register the fact that children were being shown indecent cartoons. And this one from the Highland News saying that a bullied girl at the school had tried to strangle herself with a tie. So what's the background of this, and how does it fit in with the investigation?
This is one of the first areas we've been looking at in the Highland investigation, and we're putting this up here today just as an indication of the sort of information we're seeing. We've got a huge amount of information coming forward, and we hope to have more when we meet people next week in Inverness. The next slide just shows it's the Royal Highland Hotel in Inverness. So that's on Wednesday the 26th, and we hope to see a lot of people there. Now, Ardasir is a very interesting case. One small primary school, one example. The janitor, like Mr. Thomas Brown, right? He was a janitor at more than one school. He had been showing indecent images to children in Ardasir Primary School playground, but it was for his conduct at another primary school that he was charged and convicted and put on the sex offenders register. Now, the parents at Ardasir found there was no investigation or even acknowledgement publicly at what he was doing in Ardasir Primary. The whole thing seemed to be hushed up. So one of the themes that we're seeing from Highland is that problems, embarrassing incidents, etc., rather than having the disinfectant of sunlight, are concealed or hushed up, and there is no proper investigation. Now, the second case you mentioned there, which was also at this same primary school, and the reason we're going back a few years is that this takes us into the area where 2006 to 2009 was the trial of the named person scheme and the GIRFEC approach. So what was happening in Highland then has been rolled out across the whole of Scotland now. The girl there was very badly bullied. I'll read just a couple of quick excerpts from the Highland News article there. They say they've been the family is still the incident left the pupil at Ardasir Primary School traumatised. According to her mum, Brooke has now been offered a place 8 miles away, Croy Primary. But the family is still angry at education bosses who are refusing to meet transport costs in their new school. Her mum, Pauline McGregor, told the Highland News the bullying had gone on for months. Nothing was done about it despite us reporting it to the head teacher. We moved to the area in 2007, and Brooke was enrolled in Ardasir Primary. The bullying didn't start until March or April that year. It was incessant. One boy was the ringleader, but she's been targeted by both boys and girls in the class. Later, it goes on, when single mum Miss McGregor went to school to collect her daughter. She said Brooke's teacher met her at the playground. She was very upset. There was tears in her eyes. She told me what had happened. She said there had been an incident and explained that Brooke had put a tie around her neck and was trying to choke herself. Other pupils were standing around chanting, "Go, Brooke, go." And that's what alerted the teachers. We were told her lips had turned blue. The head teacher and the teacher said that she got a terrible shock. I felt sick. You hear about young teenagers being driven to suicide by bullying, but Brooke is only 9. And her grandfather, this little girl's grandfather, said the authorities seem to forget that she is a victim, and yet the boy that has caused this nightmare is still in school. A Highland Council spokesman said, "We cannot comment on individual circumstances." Now, would you be interested to hear, Brian, what was said by the just a few months later, just a few months after that incident, what was said about Her Majesty's inspectors of schools when they went to that primary?
Well, of course, I'd be extremely interested, but I may suspect I know what's coming.
Well, here we go. Now, bear in mind the scene that's just been painted there. This is what Her Majesty's inspectors in a thorough examination of the school said. Children behave well in classes and around the school. Most are confident that the school will deal effectively with any incidents of bullying. Children feel safe and valued in school and know what to do if they have any concerns. Staff have a very positive relationship with children. They are committed to the well-being and support of all children and have appropriate awareness of child protection issues. So that gives you an idea just how much you can rely upon the government, upon the state, regulating itself. This is, of course, garbage.
Yes. And it's the pattern we see across the country. Wherever we go, if you try to expose that there's a failing within a public body, all that happens is that there's a closing of ranks and they defend themselves.
Now, there's more to come in the story of that little girl, but we'll keep that for following weeks. But actually, it gets worse. The way that the family was treated subsequently by the Highland Council, it gets worse.
Right, well, let's just have a quick reminder of that event then. That's on the 26th, Wednesday. If you're interested in getting involved in this investigation, it's at the Royal Highland Hotel, Station Square in Inverness. David will be there, and I hope you get a good turnout, David. Now, the Scottish National Party then seems to be having a bit of a problem with what? What are we talking about here? References to the Holocaust?
Well, possibly the worst judged political stunt in the history of political stunts, I think. This is the very famous Brain family. Now, you'll appreciate that we all know that the Scottish Government will not get involved in individual cases, except, of course, when they do, and they've got hugely involved in this case where it's obviously been in their political interest to do so. The Brain family were facing deportation, having contravened the requirements of their visa. The Home Office in London, it would seem, was actually being quite lenient with them and trying to find a compromise. But this was seized on by the Scottish National Party, made into a political issue. And in came Mr. Brain to the Scottish National Party conference. Now, bear in mind, Nicola Sturgeon doesn't get involved in individual cases. Here he is on the stage at the Scottish National Party conference, and he's wearing a little badge, a badge redolent of memories of the Holocaust. It's yellow, it's a diamond in this case, and it has the letter F on it, which he explained stands for foreigner, and how he has been targeted by the evil British state and saved by the benign and benevolent Scottish government. So it's not subtle, but I'm sure you see what they're trying to do in terms of painting the British state as evil and themselves as good. Now, on one regard, I would suggest that this is a dangerous line to take for a nationalist and socialist party, and also that Twitter has been quite good at pointing out other words beginning with the letter F that badge could in fact stand for. So there's been some nice Glaswegian humour in there, which I won't repeat today.
No. Well, you did send me a few tweets, but this was one of them, and seemed to be pretty much indicative. I've been used, and I'm too stupid to have noticed. Is this typical of the sort of response to this?
Well, yes. The response has been quite disdainful, but also the fact that you would use it's cheapening the political language. You know, you have an event, whatever you think of the Holocaust, millions of people died, millions of innocent people died, and the killing was on an industrial scale. And here you have one family being actually quite well treated over a fairly minor dispute over a visa, and that's the metaphor you go to. It's crass. It's embarrassing, and it cheapens the political language, and it coarsens the political language as well, because everyone runs around calling everyone else a Nazi, and all of a sudden you don't have any sort of exchange of ideas or examination of the facts or the case at all. Mental activity closes down, and it becomes simply a matter of abuse and grandstanding, which is what this was.
All right. Now, these points, David, I think we consider them in relation to the failure of the Scottish state to do anything to protect the Doherty family. As far as I know, there's no communications with the family. Can you give us a sort of update and also say what, if anything, Nippy Sturgeon has been doing to help the Dohertys?
Done nothing to help the Dohertys. She may have been doing quite a lot to harm the Dohertys. We're not quite sure because obviously it's all secret, but certainly nothing to help. Now, we haven't heard from the Dohertys now for 3 weeks. We're getting very concerned about their safety, whether or not they're in fact okay and still enjoying breathing the free air of Ireland or not. We don't know. It illustrates this. Here you have a family who's had their 4 children violently seized without any reason, any lawful excuse by a foreign state. Nicola Sturgeon does nothing. We have one family who has a minor dispute over a visa application, and Nicola Sturgeon puts them on the stage at the party conference. She leads a standing ovation as they walk onto the stage, and lauds them and praises them to the heavens. Can you imagine the impact that she could have had in the Doherty case? With that degree of power, with that degree of media attention, with that degree of focus on her, she could have stopped the Doherty case right now. She could have sorted it, because if she'd brought Brian and Janice Doherty onto the stage in that way, what would have happened? I tell you this, their kids would have been back very quickly. In fact, it's almost certainly the case that the mere threat of doing that would have seen all of the government agencies involved resolve this situation. But she will not move. She will not act. She will not act in order to make sure that entities charged with behaving in a lawful manner are doing their job, and that's the very excuse that she's given for acting in individual cases in the past.
Okay, so complete change of subject then. We're just going to discuss the American election a little bit, and you wanted to cover this this Haaretz article, and it's an opinion piece. The headline is, "I hadn't been called a kike since 4th grade. Donald Trump changed all that."
Yeah, it's not entirely unrelated to the previous article. So here you have an article in Haaretz by an American journalist, who's a Jewish American journalist, and who has described some of the anti-Jewish abuse that she's been getting on Twitter by surrounding the fact that she's opposing the Donald Trump presidency. Now, one aspect of this is there is an element in the right. We often look at the grabbing of power by the state. It's usually coming from the left, and people who love freedom tend to be more attuned to watching from threats from the left. But there's also a threat from the right, and it has come out of the woodwork surrounding the Donald Trump presidency. The degree to which Trump himself has encouraged it is certainly debatable, but it's certainly been there. We reported earlier on Donald Trump in the early stages of his candidacy. We covered articles by Jeffrey Tucker, who called him publicly a fascist and was assailed by some of the nastiest elements in the right-wing part of American thought for weeks thereafter. So this is a continuation of the same thing. But again, we see imagery from the Holocaust. We see the history of the Holocaust used and made a political football and weaponized. And some of the abuse this journalist was getting was completely appalling. Some of it may well have been, in fact, simply just to discredit Trump. And it's not good to see history used as a political football in that way. What we need is history to be a proper intellectual search for the truth. And for that to happen, there needs to be less hype around it and more calm reflection, and also the intellectual honesty to look at facts which are maybe not convenient to individual political views.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, David, we're running out of time here, so the next couple of articles we'll just brief comments on, please. So this is from the Press and Journal. donate your organs and have your funeral paid for under new plans?
Yes. Did you like this one?
Well, it's a bit of a circular argument, I think, isn't it?
Well, Soylent Green is not people, but you are a kit of parts. We've now got a situation where the government says it's immoral to buy organs, so you can't actually have a market. If there was a free market, there would presumably be a market value, and that would kind of sort out the supply problem. But that's immoral. But the government will buy your organs from you. It's just going to pay you a pittance.
Sorry, David. Does that mean I can sell my grandmother?
Well, parts of her, yes. You can monetize your grandmother. I think it's called a terminal profit.
Right. Okay. And this one from the Daily Record then: Fair City dad outraged by his primary school's treatment of his son.
Yes, this was a very bizarre case. This is from our hometown of Perth. He was this chap Peter Nichol. He was shocked and appalled to discover that his son Jake, who attends Canoe Primary School, had been singled out and fitted with a newfangled device called an M-Wave personal stress reliever. This sounds like something from the IT crowd, but it's not. This was fitted to this boy without the father's knowledge or consent, and against the boy's expressed wishes. It was so that the boy could learn how to handle his emotions when he becomes overexcited or angry. So I think this is an example of a small boy being a small boy, and a very bizarre response from the school. And it appears that there's no policy or a decision having been made to fit this device in council-wide in Perth and Kinross Council. And it seems that the individual school teacher has been pinned with the blame in this case. But I would suggest to other people they watch for unusual devices being fitted to their children.
But perhaps this response isn't so unusual in the context of named person.
Well, in the context of named person, you appreciate that the state wants to know the minutiae of your family life and wants to monitor everything and gather lots of data. And that's all very well, but don't you ask for data on them or on the state, because the state's response is, of course, we do not comment on individual cases.
Right, David, we're going to just end very quickly on it is absolutely key who is around our children, who is around our young teenagers. But this headline caught my eye. It's from the Telegraph, and it says university criticised after offering young people £400 to be filmed having sex. This is Coventry University, and apparently they want to do this because it's going to help the message that if you use a condom, it doesn't, quote, kill the mood. But the idea was to film youngsters having sex in natural settings. It's all going to be done very nicely and tastefully shot by film crews. Well, this is the lady mentioned, Dr. Katie Newby. She's been doing research into sort of behaviour and how you change people's behaviour. And it was her name in the article to do with the fact that they want candidates to film them having sex. So some interesting questions there. But we went to have a look at Chance to Change. This was the website. What they say is it's about group-based intervention where the only criteria for referral is a willingness to attend. This is some of their staff. And interestingly enough, this is Emma Morris, founder and managing director. She was working with a consultant psychiatrist. But when we spoke to Chance to Change this morning, they said they had no connection whatsoever with the initiative in Coventry University, and that they were concerned there might have been a breach of copyright. So we're not sure what's going on, but we'd like to make it quite clear that website Chance to Change said to us today they are not connected with the filming for sex. But this led us to have a look at some other chances to change, and this is another one here. Same idea, people taking young people out to help them change their behaviours. So we went to have a look at who might be involved, and we were very interested to see that their chair was Sheriff David Mackey. He's been a judge in Scotland for 12 years. He brings his youth justice background and his passionate belief in the redemption qualities of young people who have a desire to change their lives. He's a long involvement working with marginalised young people in wilderness settings. And I was quite surprised to see that. I wonder whether you would have any brief comments, David.
I'm not sure I should actually dive into brief comments without a bit of research on that myself. I would suggest that no, I would rather not comment actually.
Okay, so we'll just leave it with the fact that if you're a parent of a child, a young child, or even a teenager who's at university, you need to understand who is around your children and what their real objective is. It might be devices, it might be behavioural change, it might be would they accept £400 to be filmed having sex. Welcome to Theresa May's Conservative Britain in 2016. The route to war and, of course, an attack on our children's minds. So if anybody has any information on the Doherty family, we'd like to know. We think it's time that the police were asked if they are now missing persons or indeed at risk of some very dangerous issues. And we're going to say thank you to all our viewers and listeners for joining us today. If you like what we're doing, please consider taking out a subscription or making a donation. David, as always, thank you for joining us. We will be back same time on Monday. Thank you. Bye-bye.